Okay, hi all. We're going to get started. My name is Joey Colvin. I'm a content marketing manager at mParticle. And on behalf of the team, I'd like to say a huge thank you for tuning in today for our live customer data platform demo and Q&A series. We're really excited to walk you all through the mParticle platform and answer any CDP related questions you may have. Taking the lead today is going to be Anthony Westmoreland, who's a team lead principal solutions engineer at mParticle. Before we get underway, there are just a few minor housekeeping items that we'd like to address. If you lose audio or video at any point, please let us know by using the chat feature, which is down in the bottom meeting panel. If you have any questions, please share them as they come up using the Q&A feature, also down in that bottom meeting panel. We will be addressing all questions together during the Q&A session in the last few minutes of the webinar. Finally, we'd like to also share that we will be following up with a recording of the webinar. So if there are any moments of the session that you'd like to revisit or share, you will be able to do so. And without further ado, Anthony, I'll let you take the lead.
Awesome. Thank you, Joey. And hi, everybody. Thank you for joining our live demo today. Just to keep it within a little bit of bounds, today's demo is really meant to give you like a 1,000-foot view of how a CDP works and what you can do with a CDP. And most specifically, today we'll be focusing on managing data from a variety of inputs, unifying the data against a single customer profile, activating that data across your ecosystem of partners, whether that be marketing or analytics or marketing automation, as well as performing governance over your data through different varieties of tools and features within the mParticle platform. That being said, as I think about a customer data platform and really the core components of a CDP from mParticle's perspective, we believe that the foundation to success in enabling both simple and complex marketing use cases and strategies really is set upon these four components. And the four components being infrastructure, quality, governance, and then personalization capabilities. I always like to pair together our data infrastructure and data-driven personalization as hand in hand. A very good example and a use case that we've powered for customer RBI and Burger King is the $1 Whopper or the One Cent Whopper campaign. So imagine integrating an attribution partner, a geolocation partner, your analytics tool, your marketing automation tool, all in real time to create a campaign where when a user that has something like the Burger King app walks near a McDonald's, you can send off a push notification to claim a 1 cent Whopper. And so that campaign actually received a lot of accolades for not only being very creative, but really taking advantage of using data and using a system like a CDP to enable real-time use cases. Additionally, things like your data quality, so maintaining the integrity of your data across the stack, whether that be in a pre-planning process or transforming the data as it's received or sent out, can ensure consistent data and accurate data. There are plenty of times when teams are looking at data amongst multiple different teams, and there can be variances which can cause conflicts and decisions that need to be made. And then finally, when you think about governance, governance itself can be from the regulatory perspective. So imagine your GDPRs or your CCPAs, but also when we think about the types of data that you'll be sharing downstream. Not every system needs every data point. And so there are ways to help control things like costs, but also help control compliance and respecting your user's consent state as you integrate data across the stack. As just a quick reminder, in mParticle's perspective, a CDP can really be thought of as middleware or a data hub for your customer data. And so imagine your data, it should be agnostic from wherever it comes from. mParticle provides multiple SDKs. Right now we're sitting at about 12 different SDKs. Imagine your iOS, your Android, your Roku TV, Fire TV, your Xbox. We also provide an API endpoint so we can ingest data from anywhere. When we think about the integration as well, it's not just ingesting data, it's also connecting the data across the stack, whether that be an event stream or an audience stream, or even connecting the data to other tools that really make up the infrastructure for your company. A CDP should be able to ingest and connect across the stack, whether it be ad tech, MarTech, or any customer data dependent tool. take a quick sip of water before I keep going. Now, with a little bit of that setup in mind, I want to hop into the platform itself. Excuse me while I hop out of here. And for today, we're going to start, just as we're saying, in the planning component. So within mParticle, data is actually broken down into a few different areas. And so here on the left side of my screen, you can start to see my navigation bar. And as a quick lay of the land, mParticle hosts and organizes data in 3 tiers. The highest level is your org. Underneath that, you can have accounts. And underneath accounts, you can have a workspace. This really helps us support our companies that have multiple brands underneath one umbrella. So you can think something like an NBCU or a Turner, where they have CNN and Bleacher Report and other brands, where all of the data flows into one system. And then within that system, you can control user access to only see the data that's appropriate for their brand, and also understand which pools of your users are generating data across your different channels. Getting into one of our first use cases, so managing the data from a variety of inputs. mParticle can be used in a pre-planning perspective. So here under Data Master, we're actually looking at a way to create what we're calling our plans. And so within a plan, you can create all the events and subsequent attributes that you expect mParticle to receive. And so here, if I went down to the start free trial custom event of type transaction, there are additional attributes where the plan ID is an expected value to be a number. And then within that number, we're expecting a min to a max value. And so when you think about the data planning, you really want to use mParticle to create a framework that defines, standardizes, and then creates the governed or expected data that you intend something like your CDP to receive. There are plenty of times when kind of the leadership or the people that would be leveraging the data either have spent weeks creating what they think is a clean schema to only then have someone on engineering or an inbound data source actually mess or lessen the integrity of the data as it's being ingested. So something like a data plan within mParticle can be used to not only define what events and attributes you expect, but also start to intelligently track when violations are created. And so inside of mParticle, our live stream is one of the few areas that we actually start to expose data within the UI. From a security perspective, mParticle really doesn't expose user data, nor do we allow you to change the data from within the UI itself. Data is changed as we receive different attributes or events from either the client side or from data from server to server. I'm going to pause the live stream. Here you can start to see some of the X's next to the ingested events. And this is where mParticle will start checking against a plan that we were creating in the previous panel. And so not all data needs to be checked against a plan. However, if you are assigned a plan, you can start detecting violations. And then as you start to really QA and implement something like a CDP, you can ensure that your schema is clean from start to finish. What's really good to understand about live stream is, though you won't be in this portion of our platform a lot, it's really great for QA, but also understanding how your data can start connecting and stitching together. So here at the top, you can start to see session starts and session ends, which are events that are natively handled by our SDKs for you. A lot of our media partners find this extremely valuable as their users are watching content across a variety of devices. So if you think about how much of the content has this user watched, and did they start to switch devices, and being able to stitch that together is really maintained through something like a session. So having an out-of-the-box feature really enables a lot of our media customers to understand the full journey of their users. Additionally, when we think about the data, you can see here that I have batches from iOS, but mParticle is agnostic to where data comes from. So again, we have our SDKs that really support the variety of platforms that exist, but we also can be agnostic to where data comes from via our server-to-server API endpoint. Finally, rounding out kind of managing your data from a variety of inputs is our data catalog, which really is a transparent data dictionary or a collaborative repository of all the data, customer data that has been ingested by your CDP. Really, mParticle's intention is to have as many teams coming in and collaborating under an individual platform and understanding the integrity of their data as it's being, streamed across the stack. We break down events at mParticle into subcategories. So we have our custom events, screen views, commerce events, which differ from custom events to account for things like products, attributes or user level information, and then things like sessions or crashes. If I were to search for an event, let's say start free trial, within mParticle, we can show you where we've received that data point from. And then from a statistics perspective, if I scroll out just a bit more, we can also show you where we stream data down to. And there have been plenty of times when business stakeholders with meetings are trying to understand whether or not a data point or whether or not the performance of their users is accurate. And so someone like a product team versus an analytics team could have different metrics. With mParticle in place, you can start to understand and have continuity not only in the amount of data that you've ingested, but ensuring that the same amounts of data as you intend go to the endpoint systems. This really allows you for oversight into the system itself and ensuring that as you plan your data and manage your data, that you have a clean schema from the start and as you move forward throughout your journey of building your updated stack. Once data has been ingested, mParticle always associates data to some kind of user, whether that be in an anonymous state or a fully known state or any state in between. If I go to our user activity view, we'll start to get into how we unify data against a single customer profile. So I know that in my demo org here, I can search for a user based on an email address that I have. And in mParticle, we'll actually return that full profile of the user. Within the profile itself, there are unique modules that pertain to this user's state. Here we have the identity store where we have this mParticle ID that tracks a user in the background, which allows us to do things like track a user as they transition from anonymous to known, as well as transitioning a user across different devices. So if a user goes from anonymous to known on something like, say, a Roku device or maybe their iPhone, and you've already been engaging with this user across web, we can alias that user's data together to create the full picture of the user regardless of the channel. Additionally, all the other IDs that make up your stack can be completely open. mParticle is not prescriptive on the way that we actually want you to determine and deterministically resolve identity. We'll work with you to understand how you need mParticle to resolve identity for you. Underneath the profile, we have where we've seen this user across different inputs or feeds, which are where we ingest data from a vendor. The devices that we've seen the user across, the state of the user, so think age, name, location, models or scores that you might have about a user. Audience membership, so we do have an audience capability within the platform, which I'll get to at the end of the call. And then any consent that you collect about the user. And so as you think about mParticle creating a CRM light about your users, this is really can be used not only for things like personalization via our profile API. If you didn't have one in place today, you could actually start to build your own personalization engine based off of the mParticle information. But we actually natively enrich all events that we receive with everything that we know about the user. So as you think about maybe your data science team is starting to create new models or create new scoring, they could actually leverage mParticle to make richer or better decisions based on the models that they need, based on current information about the user. After you've ingested data and we're looking at an individual user, you actually need to connect that data up somewhere. And so activating data across the ecosystem, very, very simple. In our directory, we have all of our productized turnkey integrations that you can really turn on at the click of a button and the insertion of something like a key, a secret, or a token. Postmates is one of our early customers that from the very start of using mParticle, they turned on a dozen systems and started integrating their data across the stack seamlessly. When you're looking for a partner, you could search for a lot of the common partners out there. So Braze for your marketing automation. You could look for a MailChimp for your ESP. It could be somebody like Amplitude for your analytics. And then most recently, we've partnered with LiveRamp as well. And so we can help ease the onboarding process with LiveRamp by creating a simple flow into their systems, as well as we can create an audience extension. So mParticle natively has around 100 audience integration endpoints. And via a kind of dual partnership, as long as you have a contractual relationship with LiveRamp, or you can create that contractual relationship through mParticle, we can turn on any audience endpoint that you would have through LiveRamp. So that would turn our 100 into something like more than 1,000 different audience endpoints to activate your data across. From an audience perspective, that's one way to activate your data, but very quickly from an event stream perspective, connecting your data up a few clicks of a button. The mParticle interface is really a simple UI that's meant to enable a marketer to start to control and connect integrations or vendors very quickly. We also want to reduce your engineering dependencies. There's going to be a little bit of engineering help getting set up, so getting things tagged or data flowing into mParticle. But from that moment on, you're not dependent on engineering to set up a new integration. So say if you wanted to connect iOS data to a separate output like an Amplitude, here through a few clicks of the button, we can establish a stream of data that someone with a very non-technical background has already created. Additionally, from the governance perspective, you don't always want every data point to be going to an endpoint. So if I were to come in and look at, let's say, a Mixpanel, here inside of the mParticle platform, we start to expose our governance capabilities as it pertains to data flows. So with rules, we enable you to do transformation of your data. So maybe somebody accidentally fat-fingered an event name. And so now instead of it being start free trial, it's start free tray. You can easily use a rule to transform the data to be in the proper format before sending it downstream. You can also use forwarding rules to determine whether or not you should be sending data to a downstream vendor. And so as you start to think about CCPA or GDPR compliance, as you start to collect consent about your users, or if they don't want you to use their data across kind of any analytics or marketing capabilities, you can use a consent state to do not forward data depending on some kind of consent given that mParticle has collected. Sampling is what I like to call is the how much data. So maybe you don't need every data point in a downstream system. You might be doing something like performing due diligence on a new analytics tool. So you want to move from Mixpanel to Amplitude. mParticle can help power that by doing a sample of 10% of your user data. And then you can turn on a brand new system, avoid a cold start using what we call as a data replay. So we do store data for you on AWS. And at any point in time in the future, if a system goes down, we always replay the data so you have complete continuity of your data, so you never have data loss. But as also you start to think about testing new tools, or if maybe you've bought a new tool, or maybe even kind of like your data science team or your analytics team wants to get a fresh batch of information, you can push as much data anytime you want. And finally, on the governance capabilities, we also have our filters. So every event and attribute that mParticle has received is exposed inside of our filters, allowing you to control through a very simple toggleable interface whether or not you want to send data to an endpoint. So as you start to think about turning on a lot of vendors, many of them charge you on event volume. So a partner like Iterable or Braze really only needs the events that fire off the triggers for whatever email or push campaign you might be running. So you can easily start to control and cut down on your costs by turning off events that you don't need in a downstream system. Also, from a compliance and regulatory perspective, if you didn't need to share certain user level information across the stack, you can start turning that off. And so if you have kind of a legal team that's concerned about complying with GDPR or CCPA, you can easily turn off any data what pertains to a user outside of an event stream to help kind of ease any legal concerns. After you've set up very much your filters or any forwarding rules, very rarely will you change what I've seen or I've shown you so far. This is your pipes. You want it to flow pretty seamlessly. Finally, as you think about activating your data, mParticle also has an audience builder tool. And inside of our intuitive UI, we make it super simple for a non-technical user to build a list or a segment without having to use SQL or any kind of querying. So if I were to build and want to build something like a suppression list, mParticle really becomes a valuable tool because we handle adding and dropping users in real time. So say if you had a campaign and you wanted to run user acquisition across 10 different channels, as soon as you acquired the user, you don't want to waste your money trying to reacquire the user. So suppressing them and then having a system that can do that in real time becomes very valuable for a lot of our customers. So if I were to build a suppression list, I choose what data I want to make available inside of our UI. And then within the UI, we create a drop-down interface. And the criteria are all the events and attributes that mParticle has received that you want to make available to create your list. So for a suppression list, I want to look for users that have had greater than 0 sessions within whatever time frame it might be. So I might want to do a 3-week time period, or I could look for user with really any kind of event within that same time period. So things like frequency and recency, and then any combination or logic that you'd like to create, it's fairly simple to do within the interface. And then much like we think about connecting data, connecting a list or activating a list is the same type of point and click interface. Giving my computer a moment to catch up with me. So now you can create one suppression list that maintains the integrity. So as a user has a session or a user has an event, we'll automatically add the user to this list. And within 3 weeks, if they don't have a new event or if they haven't had a session, we'll automatically pull that out. And you can connect the suppression list to as many endpoints as you want, creating a one-to-many relationship and really creating efficiencies for the marketing team as they think about creating more complex marketing strategies. That's all I intended to show today. And with 5 minutes left, I do want to keep the floor open for a few questions. And so Joey, I'll turn it off to you for some Q&A.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Anthony. We did have a few questions come in, so we're going to cover those now. If you do have any more questions as you're listening, feel free to submit them using the Q&A feature. So first, Anthony, does mParticle connect with Facebook? And what is the advantage of building audiences in mParticle and sending them to Facebook?
Yes, so we actually have probably like a preferred partnership as we think about the vendors out in the ecosystem with Facebook, where we connect both events as well as lists or segments. And the advantage of using mParticle to do that is that we actually can use multiple keys to connect to Facebook. So imagine Facebook ID, email address, device ID, name. And Facebook has enabled a few different targeting capabilities on their end. The benefit of using mParticle to connect your lists is that Facebook is a walled garden. If you don't need your data in Facebook, you don't need to put it there because you're not getting anything back. And from a targeting perspective, if you were to send something like a high LTV list to Facebook, you wouldn't want Facebook to know that that was a high LTV user for you. So you can mask that using mParticle and then really just use that segment within Facebook for whatever your purpose may be, whether that be acquisition or retargeting or lookalikes. Really, the list could go on.
Awesome, Anthony. A second question we've received, how long does mParticle store a customer's data for?
Cool, yeah, and so this is really dependent on kind of contractual terms that you'd want mParticle to store data for. By default, we store data for about 18 months. And then if you'd like us to store that for longer or shorter, we definitely understand. So we actually partner with a few banks where data storage for longer than a year is not applicable. Or we have some customers that kind of use mParticle as a light data warehouse and they want us to retain data indefinitely until they get stood up on their own.
Got it, thanks. And third question we've received, does mParticle track anonymous user activity?
Yes, we do. With our SDKs in place, our mPID, so the mParticle ID, is storing information in a cookie as well as local storage. And so as that user is browsing your site or using something like your app without being logged in, we track data to that MPID. If at any point in the future they do log in, then you can use that MPID to either create a profile and then start associating things like email address and customer ID with that one MPID that you already know. Or you can use that aliasing feature that I brought up earlier, where we might have already seen this user and we can start to alias data from their anonymous state into their known profile.
Awesome, got it. Thank you so much, Anthony. We've received one more additional here. Anthony, one question we've received, one more. Is data that has had a warning, i.e. missing parameter as shown in the beginning of the demo, going to be forwarded to outputs?
Yes, so today it will be forwarded to outputs. Before the end of the quarter, we will actually marry the rules feature that I very briefly touched on with the data planning component. So this will allow you to determine and stop data from flowing if it doesn't comply with the plan that you have specified. You'll also be able to use a rule. So say if something was tagged improperly, you could apply the rule at that point in time. And then once the data has been transformed, then it will stream downstream.
Great, thanks, Anthony. So that just about wraps up the 30 minutes we had for the demo today. I want to say a huge thank you to all who tuned in. We loved having you and providing an introduction to mParticle for you. As mentioned earlier, we will be following up with a recording of this session via email. So if you have any more questions that do come up, please feel free to continue the conversation there and we'll provide further information. Well, thanks again, everyone. Stay safe and have a great day.
Thank you. Ciao, ciao.